little sweetheart.
They can't do nothing because I tap dance.
This is WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. You are listening to Calling Out Controversy, featuring hosts Andrew Hecht and Justin Kenyon.
And welcome to Calling Out Controversy. It's Andrew, and I'm back this week. Great to be here.
We're glad to have you back. I mean, I guess that petition came through.
Yeah, I think it was just hearing your very, very nice plea for return is what got me.
Because in the end, we all need you.
Nah, it's just, I don't know, man. I had family issues that I had to take care of, driving back and forth to airports, all that. However, we're back. Current events time. What do you got, man?
We're all glad you're back. So first off, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying that kind of these somewhat in camps on the south border are concentration camps for illegal immigrants.
So I believe the comparison she drew was what you said, but I think the exact comparison was that we have concentration camps on our southern border.
Yes.
Okay. I am upset.
Well, I mean, also you have more of the expert kind of like say on this too, because you also are Jewish.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's an expert opinion. It's just,
well, I mean, not really that, but you can kind of sense more of it.
It's an empathetic feeling.
Yeah.
Because here's the problem. And there's plenty of Jewish people out there who feel the exact opposite, and that they think that because it's not us this time, it is something that we're ignoring, or they feel like because we went through it that it's our tragedy, you should stop comparing it, which is kind of where I lay on that side. But it's not because it's our tragedy. Like in my personal family history, I had a grandfather, my Jewish grandfather, fought in the war in the Navy. He wasn't in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So my family personally was not victim to that atrocity.
You weren't affected by it.
But as a greater people, as an ethnic people, you can equate it to how Native Americans feel about their mistreatment in this country. And that's a good comparison to draw, because one thing you didn't hear is people saying that the voluntary, very important identifier there, but the voluntary traveling that this large community of possible immigrants made from Central America and South America all the way to the southern border was like the Trail of Tears, right? Nobody said that.
Yeah.
And the reason nobody said that is because voluntary, means that you decided to go, whereas the Trail of Tears was forced. On top of that, you have to say that there were much better provisions when photographed and videotaped by CNN, by Fox, by MSNBC. We're all wearing relatively clean clothing somehow. They all seemed to be pretty well nourished just by videotape. They stopped frequently, right? It was a progressive campaign. It wasn't a constant 24-hour march at gunpoint. So it's not comparable.
A baton death march or anything like that.
Right, it's not comparable. So that's why you don't say things like that. Now attribute it to the circumstance of concentration camps. Voluntarily showing up at a southern border is not the same thing as your government pointing a gun in your face and telling you to get on a train, okay? That is not the same thing. You cannot compare the two because force is a key issue here. That's the first thing that upsets me, is that people seem to forget that in the Holocaust, it wasn't just Germany either. Concentration camps were being set up in other countries that Germany controlled, like Poland, but at the same time,
Auschwitz.
That had to be Auschwitz-Birkenau, yeah, but other countries were sending Jews on trains to Germany, as in get rid of these people for us. So by force, multiple governments sent these people to their demise. And when they got there, by gunpoint, for the entire time that this happened. They were loaded onto trains like cattle, boxed in so tight that people died from heat stroke on the train ride there. Not even getting to the camp yet. Then once you get to the camp, you're killed, immediately killed, if you're not fit for work, or if you step out of line, or if you fight, or anything. Sometimes arbitrarily killed. At the camp, you're arbitrarily killed. You know, I visited the Holocaust Museum when I was in Israel, and there was a man talking on a video about how just for fun, Nazis used to line people up in blocks, in lines and columns, and just pick off the one on the end. So Jews used to have to fight each other for middle spots so they didn't die, so they could survive. And you want to compare that to being detained at a southern border you willfully showed up to? What did you think was going to happen when you came here? I just want to ask one person that. What did you think was going to happen when you showed up here? Because when you showed up here, you didn't give notice. You've known for over 15 years from previous administrations, but both the Obama administration and the end of the Bush administration, that we did not take in immigrants at the border properly. 2014, Barack Obama said in an interview, "We will turn you around and send you home." It's a popular interview. It's all over social media. Do not come here that way. You need to apply for immigration status. And if you're seeking asylum, that's also a process. Now, we underfund the Border Patrol.
Very much
and
so.
Very much so. There's less staff and there's less facilities because we don't have the funding. And this administration has asked repetitively for funding. And Democrats want to hold it up because they want to make sure it doesn't go to the border wall.
Chris Matthews said this best about like why they keep on letting them in is that Democrats want the votes and big business wants the cheap labor.
Right, but I don't want to focus on why they keep letting them in. I want to focus on the conditions that they're in. Now, while I will absolutely agree that when the government went to court the other day and said that they weren't required to provide toothpaste, toothbrushes, and basic necessities, I was a little upset, and I said that's wrong. I'm not going to defend that at all. But don't pretend like not giving basic necessities and arbitrarily shooting someone in the head is the same thing. I'm agreeing it's wrong. It's not concentration camp wrong. It's barely internment camp wrong. Because don't forget, internment camps, again, are at the point of a gun. You are forced into that situation. These people, which I sympathize for it being tough. Believe me, I understand it. But these people left their home country and walked voluntarily to the southern border on their own free will. They could have just as easily chose to sit in their own country and defend it from the gangs they are saying they're running from the corruption they're saying they're running from. And yes, that's also a very difficult fight to have. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easier. But it's still a choice. You could have chose to defend your own country. And instead, many people, for whatever reason, maybe families or insecurity, decided to leave and come here. And we have a responsibility to take in immigrants as well. But if you're going to underfund the Border Patrol, if you're going to underfund the regulatory and legitimizing agencies that are supposed to be taking care of this issue, and then you show up with thousands of people saying, "Let me in, I'm here, gotta let me in," what do you want us to do? What do you expect? We got to process these people. And they want to say kids are being removed from their families. How do you know that's their family? How does the Border Patrol know that's their family? You already have reports of coyotes. And coyotes is a term of people that smuggle people across the border. But usually people are paying someone to take their kids in an instance where a child shows up without their parent. So yeah, you can take it on their word that that's their child. But if you have no documentation, you have no medical records, you have no identification at all, and you show up here with a couple kids and go, "That's my kid," how am I supposed to believe you? It's a border security issue that you separate them so that way you know that's actually their parent. What if that kid's being kidnapped? We don't know. We have no idea. So yeah, you got to separate adults and children.
Well, this is something that she's probably just doing to get clicks or more attention or whatever, kind of make it seem bigger than it actually is for her own, gain or whatever. I mean, this is also the same woman who said that on another live stream that we should stop having kids in order to curb global warming.
And again, it's nonsense. And I understand that from what she's said on Twitter and what she said in Congress, there's some things that she's actually a little intelligent about in terms of, especially when it comes to pharmaceutical companies and the market protection that they get for no reason.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with her in certain things like that. I'm not a fan of corruption, so I understand
this isn't the first
that she has it.
This isn't the first time she's turned something small into something big for her own gain, kind of like when one person on Twitter said like you shouldn't be dancing or something like that, and she blew it up and made it seem like everybody was saying that about her.
Right. And again, I understand the want to defend yourself. I understand the want to gain attention. I understand what she's doing as a new congressperson. And like I said, there are some things I can actually agree with her on in other facets. But what you should never do is compare tragedies. It doesn't matter which tragedies you're trying to compare. You shouldn't compare tragedies unless you're ranking them on body count as to which one's the worst. It's not, and that's a stretch too, because it's not always death that defines the worst tragedy. And it's obnoxious, but it's hurtful to the people you're comparing. Because
I don't think she cares.
I know, but again, like, you don't tell Native Americans they didn't suffer, right? You don't tell people who had to deal with the crisis in Sudan right now that they're not suffering. You don't tell people up in Armenia that Turkey didn't make them suffer. You don't tell people that their plight is not horrible by comparing it to another current plight. It's not right. What you're saying when you compare two tragedies is somebody in this comparison gets to hurt more than others. That's what you're saying. You're saying that by comparing the Holocaust and concentration camps to the southern border in America in modern times, what you're saying is if these two are comparable, then Jews did not suffer that bad, because the conditions at the southern border are nowhere near the level of heinous and tragic that was endured by the Jewish people. So if you're going to compare them and you're going to say they're equivalent in crisis and equivalent in tragedy, you're diminishing the tragedy. And every time you compare two tragedies, you're diminishing the tragedy in one way or another. And again, you can look at basic body count if you really want to. What have we had deaths in total fatalities from the southern border? A handful of people, none of them killed by Border Patrol.
Well,
not one of them killed by the Border Patrol.
Well, I mean, also, if you go off body count, then Hitler isn't even the worst than Stalin
right.
or Mao Zedong is.
Again, at no point have I said the Holocaust is the worst thing in human history.
Yeah,
it's one of the worst things in human history.
I'm pointing that out.
It's one of the worst. If you have to look in terms of body count, the genocide of Native Americans by colonists, the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, Joseph Stalin's reign on Russia, or you could say communism in Russia, communism in China.
Mao Zedong's a big one.
Yeah. Those are tragedies that have millions and millions of deaths. Those might be comparable, but you're still going to end up hurting somebody by doing so.
Even actually kind of like North Korea, that's famine.
If you take all of those and you compare that to a southern border where you have 7, I think, at this point, deaths, none of them at the hands of the government directly, only because of illness, like medical illness, and none of which you can actually certifiably say they showed up healthy and then got sick. You can't say that. Do you know why? No medical records, no predisposition records, no pre-existing condition records.
But
you
then
don't
again,
know.
It's going to be the news story will say on one side, because each side is going to come up with one part of the story that they're going to show. One side is going to say like, oh, this was all during American care, so the Americans were responsible for this child dying or whatever, where the other side is going to be like, oh, well, this person has what you've been saying the entire time.
Right, and that's it. It's just frustrating because it's not like America is sitting here going, do you know what we're going to do? Just let these people die in a cage. You know, children in cages, women in cages, men in cages. Where do you want us to house them? Give me, somebody please write in, call in, comment in the YouTube section. Give me an alternative place to send thousands of immigrants that showed up at the border in less than 2 weeks. Show me where you want them to go. Please tell me what the right way to handle this is, because I have an idea, and it's an idea that should have been implemented long before this. Just as Ellis Island is the key eastern immigration point, always has been, historically, although it closed in 1954 for some reason, it could handle this level of people. Back in the day, this was the level of people that was normal at immigration ports. So why don't we have a southern Ellis Island? Or why don't we establish one? and then maybe we can do this a little bit faster. But you know what? That requires funding. It requires funding.
Yeah.
And that's the closest fathomable idea that I can come out with and say, as a 24-year-old who's going through college for the third time, this is what my years of critical thinking experience have gotten you. Why don't we open up an immigration port instead of putting a border wall? Not that walls don't work, and not like there's not an ocean that acts as a wall between us and the eastern hemisphere of the world, but why not also add a port of entry?
Okay.
A on land, like a port of entry, meaning a place to enter through an immigration facility.
Yeah.
Why not have a large one, highly staffed, capable of handling this level of immigration? It's a good idea. It requires funding, though, and it would require the wall, in the idea that the wall would stop people from going around the freaking building. You know, I apologize if people are offended by my tone. It's just an extremely frustrating issue. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be interviewing Kevin Luibrand.
Yep.
And this is WVCR 88.3,
The
Saint. So with us today is Kevin Luibrand of Luibrand Law here in Latham. He's one of the top searches and seizures lawyers in the state, if not the country. He's been practicing for over 30 years, right?
Over 35 years.
Over 35. And he has a lot of experience to bring with the table. He's the perfect guest we could find for this topic. Obviously, Fourth Amendment searches and seizures. So, Mr. Luibrand, just how did you get involved in this type of law?
It was actually odd. I was a transactional attorney, a lawyer who does business deals, and I had a client who was arrested by the Schenectady police, and he was beaten unconscious during the arrest. And I went and saw him in jail that day at 6 a.m, and he was a mess, covered in blood, and he said he didn't do anything wrong, and so I started representing him, and that was 34 years ago when I transitioned out of transactional work right into civil rights.
Okay. And in your career, how many cases do you think you've gone through for searches and seizures?
Well, at least 200. Search and seizure cases come up constantly. They come up in criminal arrests, but they also come up in affirmative claims that you bring against municipalities, police departments, and the like for excessive force. That's where search and seizure law, the Fourth Amendment, covers excessive force. So that's a common area of litigation.
Okay. And in your experience, what's the most common misconception about search and seizure law?
Search and seizure, you hear the word seizure. The U.S. Supreme Court has determined that a seizure must be reasonable, and therefore if it's unreasonable, it's a constitutional violation, and that includes any kind of use of more force than is necessary to arrest somebody, to take somebody into custody. So people hear seizure and they think they don't think of excessive force, and that's right where your constitutional protections are in the for use of excessive force by authorities.
Okay, then that makes sense, because I never equate excessive force with searches and seizures. I've always thought of it more as like traffic stops or issuing a warrant and executing a warrant. I actually didn't know that it involved excessive force.
Yeah, and you can see how it's the most litigated constitutional right, the Fourth Amendment, because it does cover stops of vehicles, searches of houses, searches of people's persons, and then the use of force and arresting somebody. If you arrest somebody falsely, that's called a false arrest, and that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's an illegal seizure, in that case. If you prosecute somebody without probable cause that they committed a crime, that's protected by the Fourth Amendment. So Fourth Amendment is the core protection that lies between the citizenry and the government.
All right. So when it comes to something like a traffic stop, obviously New York recently decriminalized marijuana, if I'm correct. I believe it's under 2 ounces before it's a felony. I think that's
It's not even a criminal offense now if it's below an ounce. They can issue a citation. It's a non-criminal citation, but the law says that has to be dismissed if it's a first offense. On a second offense, it gets prosecuted as a violation, which is a non-criminal offense akin to a traffic ticket.
So let's say if you're speeding or you run a stop sign or something like that, and an officer pulls you over and they notice something in the car, does that give them a right to then search the car?
Yeah. So if a police officer has probable cause to stop your vehicle, and it could be anything, it could be a light out, it could be speeding, it could be any vehicle and traffic offense. If they have probable cause, which is reasonable suspicion that you did commit an offense, vehicle and traffic offense, they have the right. The U.S. Supreme Court says they have the right to search your entire car once they stop you for a lawful reason,
including the trunk and the glove box and everything.
Trunk, glove box. They cannot. What they're limited to is they can't open sealed containers within vehicles. They need a separate warrant for that. They can't look in your phone. They need a separate warrant for that. But they can search the vehicle itself.
Okay. Are there other stipulations to this type of law? Like any special cases that you've come across that become more tricky, or things that the average person should know?
Yeah, the biggest one is, if you're looking for guidance, it's when the police don't generally search a car after a stop for speeding or a stop for vehicle and traffic offense. They're not inclined to do that. But as soon as somebody gives them attitude, or many times a passenger gives attitude, or they start saying, I have the right not to produce my identification, that's when the police tend to utilize the right that they have to search the whole car. Typically, if somebody is polite and decent, the police will issue the traffic ticket and say thank you very much, and you're on your way. And whatever you have in your car, legal or illegal, stays with your car as you drive off. It's the attitude. My experience is, having had lots of cases involving excessive force, it's when people start using attitude towards the police when it's really not even necessary and doesn't help them at all.
So what's your take on the growing climate then of like anti-police rhetoric because of excessive force, particularly on Black Americans that we see in the media? I know my personal view is that the media can and will cherry pick instances to blow out of proportion in certain circumstances, but overall statistics will show that there is an increase in use of excessive force across the country. I don't know if that's something you've come across in recent years or
I tend to. So I've had 3 groups of cases against one particular municipality, City of Schenectady. I had a group in the late 1980s. I had a group in the late 1990s, and then around 2005 and 6. And each time I had 8 or 10 cases. I haven't seen an increase in use of excessive force. In fact, I've seen a decrease as the advent of body cams and before that dashboard cams. Those acted as a way to deter the police from overreacting, and doing things that they shouldn't do. That was a common occurrence when there wasn't video recording. But when the police know there's video recording, they tend to act better. And it's typically a leadership issue in departments when there's not sufficient supervision of police, that they tend to act out a little bit more and act aggressively when they don't need to. I really don't see a difference now than 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. If I were to say there's a difference, I would say it's lessened. I mean, you can go back to Rodney King, which has got to be more than 20 years
I
ago.
was just thinking about him. Yeah.
And that was a time when there was allegations of significant civil rights violations for excessive force and illegal searches and seizures. But you can go back to the 20s and 30s with in the South, they were rampant, and the protections that exist now did not exist back then. So.
All right, that's fair. When you take a case, what's your standard approach to searches and seizures? Like, what do you look for in the case?
Right. So I get cases two different ways. I do a lot of criminal defense work. And with criminal defense work, I'm able to examine video and speak to my client and look at police reports to determine if there was probable cause or reasonable suspicion for the stop. And then if the search went beyond what it should do, I can evaluate that. And then we use that in the criminal case because it prevents evidence from being introduced. On civil claims, which is when we're bringing a lawsuit on behalf of someone, I don't have quite the same access. I often have to go out and use the Freedom of Information law to get video recordings, to get police reports, to get body cams and dashboard cams. And I typically have to gather all those up before I can say whether there's a good claim or not. It's odd, but most of us in the criminal justice legal field agree that most of our clients embellish facts to us when we talk to them the first time because they're so, and I understand why, they're eager to find somebody to represent them, and they often don't think that they or their case is worthy enough for representation. We don't look at it that way. We actually treat people very respectfully no matter what walk of life they come from. But they feel they have to impress us, and sometimes they embellish or they flat out lie and tell us stories. So we have to take whatever our client says or a prospective client with a grain of salt and then evaluate it on our own.
All right. Was there a case in your history that was rather difficult to get through in searches and seizures, or is it usually just run of the mill?
Yeah, no, every one of them is a challenge. A couple that jump out. I was called to represent somebody associated with the Hells Angels in Arizona, and what had happened was, and this is what the search and seizure law can do for somebody who did commit a crime, arguably, but an older man and a young man were driving from California to Queens, New York, and unbeknownst to everybody, including themselves, their car had $2.5 million of cocaine in a secret compartment in the back, and they were driving on the highway from through Arizona, which is known as a gateway highway for drugs. And there was a sign up ahead that said vehicles checked for drugs, and another sign that said dogs, indicating dog sniffers up ahead. And it was the police were brilliant. They put it right after an exit, and at the exit, people who were afraid to have their cars searched would get off the exit. But the exit went nowhere. There was nothing where that exit was. It was an exit that had been under construction, so it went no place. So every car that got off, the police assumed had committed a criminal offense, and of course their car got off because they knew they had something in the car. They just didn't know what. And the police stopped them and searched the car and found the drugs and charged them and arrested them. However, the law says, as reasonable that is to stop a vehicle, there was no probable cause to stop the vehicle, meaning there was no suspicion the vehicle committed a crime other than to get off at an exit that went no place, but that's not an indication of a crime. So we had a mini trial, 3-day trial, to determine if they could even use the evidence in court, and the judge ruled no. He ruled out the evidence. It's called suppression of the evidence. The evidence was thrown out, and 2 men that faced up to 30 years in jail walked out of the courtroom at the end of the day. Both free men and no charges against them.
That's crazy. So even in that instance, even if they find something that's actually illegal, because they didn't have probable cause to search the vehicle, the charges are dropped?
Exactly. it's suppression. So how do you if the police act illegally or improperly, what is the penalty? And the penalty is that whatever they recovered during their illegal search becomes suppressed, means it cannot be used at the trial. And if it can't be used, often that's the principal evidence, and the case ends up getting thrown out. So the impetus, the encouragement for the police to act properly, despite wanting to act properly, is to not want their cases to get thrown out. So that tends to cause them to toe the line.
Have you ever come across a case where a police officer may have planted evidence?
Yes, I had a case which was caught on video, where a man was suspected of selling drugs, and he wasn't, but he was otherwise a problem, and he ran from the police in a car, and his car missed a turn and crashed into a fence, and the police went around the car to get him out, and another police vehicle dashboard recorded police officer reaching into his pocket and throwing a crack cocaine onto the ground, and then claiming it came from the vehicle. Another case which was terrible, and that is the police hired an informant to go in to a head shop, a shop that sold bongs and things of that nature that were perfectly legal, but often associated with drug use. And they hired somebody who was convicted of a crime to what's called work off their crime, and that is they work to set people up in exchange for a lesser penalty for them. And this one informant said that the head shop was selling cocaine, and went in there and ordered something, a pipe from my client. And when my client turned around, he pulled a baggie out of the informant pulled a baggie, put it on the counter, took a photograph of it, put it back into his pocket, and then the store owner sold him a pipe. And the informant left, and within minutes the police came in and arrested my client for selling crack cocaine, which he hadn't done. And he said, listen, I have 7 video cameras running in my store. They will show I didn't do it. And the police ignored it until we got involved, and then we took the tapes, we analyzed the tapes, and we saw exactly what I just told you. Somebody plant drugs in a store in order to help themselves by helping the police.
Well, that's unfortunate. What do you call it? I grew up obviously watching a lot of the television cop shows with my grandmother and my mom. And I know a lot of Americans really like the crime drama style of television. And it's funny because you watch these shows and they make everything seem very dramatic and very suspenseful and all that. But given like a couple stories that you've told already, it seems like it's so much more human and run-of-the-mill, especially in these types of cases. I just wonder, do you think that there's a like an embellishment of what like crime dramas or true crime or stuff like that on television show? Do you think it's a lot more calmed down in the real world, a lot more like less dramatic?
Yeah, one of the interesting parts is a lot of people who we represent. So when we approach it as a criminal defense attorney, what we try to do is help our client, and the government has the burden of proof. So we're always trying to attack the burden of proof, and to do that, often the clients have done something wrong, and our goal is to cause the police, the authorities, to play by the rules in trying to investigate and prosecute that wrong. And often they don't. They take shortcuts and they act negligently and carelessly, and sometimes they don't care. And for that reason, we're able to help people who may have committed a criminal offense get off of the criminal offense because of the way the police go about their work. And I represent a lot of police officers. I represent a real lot of police officers who are often accused of misconduct. And police
I was
officers
just about to ask that, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and police officers who are arrested. I represent lots who have been arrested for different crimes. And, you know, it's it's just the police rarely, but they do it at times, and a lot of those cases have come my way, but at times they just take shortcuts rather than act truly maliciously. We've had cases. I've had many cases of flat out beatings and injuries to people, but most of them are, especially the criminal cases, is overreaching, carelessness, laziness on the part of the police.
So you're talking about having defended police officers several times. Have you come across a case where a police officer was falsely accused of excessive force or improperly executing a search warrant or just violating the Fourth Amendment in any way?
Yeah. So the one that comes to mind is a police officer. It's not exactly that. The one police officer that comes to mind was accused of an assault, and was tried for that. Was charged criminally for that assault of a woman, and we had to go through a full criminal trial to defend him, to help him, and we succeeded. We won that. It's probably 8 or 10 years ago. Most of the police that we represent are police who have been accused by their departments of impropriety, and the departments are trying to fire them, and we represent them on the firing typically.
Okay. So you cover the whole gambit of searches and seizures law. You go helping police officers maintain their job, helping prove them innocent if they're falsely accused, helping people defend themselves against invalid searches and seizures. So you're all over the board.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. What's your favorite type of case? Which one are you most comfortable with?
Really anything having to do with the Fourth Amendment search and seizure. I just really enjoy understanding the law and going after misconduct. So my very first case, it was a man who had been involved in a car accident in Florida, and the car accident had been, he was driving from the Tampa area to Daytona through Alligator Alley, and there was a motorhome along the side of the road, and two men who were drunk were trying to fix their muffler, but their legs were out in the road. And my client, who had been drinking but not much, was driving along, and he hit and killed them both.
Jesus.
They were both out in the road, their legs, and he hit them both. Never saw them, no lights, and he was charged with criminally negligent homicide, very serious offenses. And ultimately, he pled no contest because he didn't want to fight it to one charge, which was leaving the scene of an accident. And he got probation. He was, all the other charges were dismissed. And he, while he was on probation in Florida, decided to move back to New York, which was Schenectady. And he asked his probation officer in Florida if he could move back, and the officer said, get an okay from Schenectady, and he got an okay from Schenectady. Schenectady said, come on up, and you can do your probation up here. So he went up. Problem is, nobody told Florida. So Florida put a warrant out for his arrest. And you roll ahead 7 years, and 7 years later, he had built up a masonry business, a bricklaying business, in which he had 150 employees and tremendous business. And one night, the police came across his the warrant, which is outstanding now for 7 years. It said he was wanted in connection with a double homicide. That's all it said. And they found his house, and they violated the Fourth Amendment any way you can think. They didn't get a warrant for his arrest. They didn't get a warrant to search. They shimmied up his back porch. They broke open his back door. They went into his apartment, and he was in bed. He was sleeping in bed, and he was naked with his girlfriend at the time. And he went to get out of bed, and they hit him in the head with a nightstick, and they dragged him into his living room naked, and they proceeded to kick and beat him and accuse him of being a murderer hiding in Schenectady, which he wasn't, of course, and brought him out to the car naked in February, covered in blood, and brought him to jail. And then they found out that they were wrong on the reason, and they made up a story about him resisting arrest. and it got very ugly. And so we represented him criminally. We got the criminal charges dismissed at trial. We had a trial. We won that, and then we sued the city for the Fourth Amendment violations, excessive force, and won that and got over $1 million verdict. And it got thrown out on appeal. And the appellate court in Manhattan said you have to retry the case. The judge made some mistakes. And we said, okay, we'll retry the case. And we retried it. And in the second trial, we got $3.5 million for him. And so that became the defining case for what I do, what we do. That became the defining case.
That's amazing. It's always really cool to hear stories about that, because I'm pre-law here, as well as going into political science and whatnot, and we have an amazing pre-law staff of professors here. But it's always cool to hear real life case stories or real life incidences where lawyers are effectively helping someone who would have no other recourse, who would have just ended up another person in the system in jail without having an attorney. When it comes to like state provided defense, do you think that there's a quality dip between when a attorney is provided for you by the state or if you hire privately? And do you think it might attribute to the fact that recent law graduates often look to employment by the state as a state provided attorney?
That's a great question. So the public defender is employed by the county, every county, to represent people that can't afford a lawyer. The public defenders tend to be extremely talented people, dedicated people. They're pure in how they approach cases. Here's the problem. This is the problem. When I go to court on a criminal case, I might have 1 or 2 cases on the docket that day. The public defender will have 35, 45, 50 cases. So while they have all those skills, very great skills, they don't have the time to devote to any individual case. So they tend not to. And they divide their talents in a triage way where they're running from case to case to case. And you'll often find a public defender, a skilled one who I have great respect for, say, I don't remember who you are as a client, or who that client is or what the crime was, because they don't. They just have too many cases. And the problem is the funding of the public defenders as it is, and frankly, the funding of the district attorneys are woefully inadequate. And because the public defender doesn't have the money, they can't hire more public defenders to spread the caseload thinner to allow the public defenders to devote more time to cases. I often call public defenders, federal public defenders, state public defenders when I have an issue, because chances are they've seen it, and I'll ask their guidance. I'll say, how did you handle this issue when it came up? And I'll use that as leads to my analysis as to how to handle an issue.
So an inadequate defense might not necessarily mean that the lawyer isn't intelligent or talented. It might just be the fact that they're so overloaded they don't have the opportunity to really analyze the details in a intricate way.
That's dead on. That tends to be the my experience with public defenders is they're overworked, and a lot of them when they develop the talent over time, they tend to leave because they're not only overworked, they're underpaid, and they can make more money outside of the public defender environment. And they come into private practice and do kind of work that I and others do.
So is it possible if you could take us through the process of a warrant being issued and what normally would be a reason a warrant gets issued for somebody's property or someone's vehicle or house, or like what's the how do you go from having a suspicion of a crime to having police in your house? Like,
right. So what the police have to do is they target, or somebody's come on the radar that they're after, and they want to look maybe in their house or in their car for evidence of illegality. The most common, of course, is drugs. And so what they do is the police have to do an affidavit, which is a sworn document in which they have to swear to facts. And those facts have to be sufficient to convince a judge that there's probable cause that a crime has been committed and that whatever they want to search will have evidence of that crime. So they have to convince a judge. And so the police will do an affidavit, and sometimes the judge will say that's insufficient. And once the judge believes it's sufficient, the affidavit is attached to a warrant that the police prepare, and then the judge signs the warrant. And the warrant, a warrant is another name for a warrant is an order, and it's an order to search. And so the police officer then takes the search warrant. Now he or she has authority to conduct a search. There is no obligation, despite what people might see, for the police to show the warrant to anyone, although most police do show it because they want the person whose property they're searching to know they have the authority to kind of bring down any stress in that interaction. And then they're allowed to search exactly what the warrant says they're allowed to search. And so the warrant is obtained often without the defendant or the target having any idea a warrant is being sought to search their property or their car or their person. They just don't know it. So if contraband's found and an arrest is made, then they hire a lawyer, and then the lawyer challenges the validity of that warrant in the first instance and could say that the judge made a decision without there being sufficient information, or might say that the police officer did not tell the truth in his application for the warrant, and that's what often gets warrants. That's often what gets the product of a warrant, whatever's found, thrown out in a case, is that process after the arrest.
So in a warrant, is there ever a circumstance where you're only allowed to search part of a vehicle or part of a piece of property or part of a house, or is it like usually more general where it's the whole car, the whole house, the whole property?
Yeah, so the law has evolved. It used to be a lot of mistakes were made by police in the warrant because they wouldn't be specific as to what they wanted to search. So it might be a house, and if the garage is not attached, they couldn't search the garage. So the police, in their application for a warrant, have to specify exactly what they want to search, what parts of a house or a piece of property, what parts of a car, a particular phone with a particular phone number. They have to really be specific in what they want to search and the reasons for that particular area of search. And then the warrant itself will say, this is what you can search. And a lot of the problems, of course, come when materials are suppressed following a search with a warrant, when the searcher, the police who do the search, exceed the scope of what they're allowed to search.
So with 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think it's 3 weeks ago now. 3 weeks ago, we had Andrew Hollister on for the Second Amendment, and he was talking about the SAFE Act. So with the SAFE Act, there's new legislation against which types of firearms you can own and utilize. And I was wondering if you have come across a case where someone has issued a search warrant for what's now being considered illegal ownership of weaponry, as opposed to previously. Like what's changed in searches and seizures realm due to the SAFE Act?
Yeah, so I mean, whatever, and I'm not an expert on the SAFE Act. Whatever the SAFE Act makes illegal is now illegal. So if somebody knows that there's an illegal weapon or an illegal weapon accessory that's in a house, they can include that in a warrant application if that's what they're looking for. One thing about warrants is you can get a warrant, say, to search a house for a weapon. Say you're investigating a homicide, and the police get a warrant to investigate a house for a weapon, and while they're searching the house within the areas they're supposed to search, they find cocaine or large amounts of drugs. They can make an arrest based upon finding that the other illegal items, it's what they're intending for, in the area they're intending that gets tested. But whatever they find, and it's considered a legal search once they begin the search.
Now, you've mentioned earlier that the most common use of a search warrant is to investigate drugs, either drug trafficking or drug use, I'm assuming. I just want to know your opinion on, do you think that we expend too much time and resources fighting what is a war on drugs, or do you think that it's necessary that we go through all these steps to prevent things like you mentioned cocaine, you've mentioned crack, we were talking about head shops, so marijuana. Like, do you think it's worth our time to be cracking down this hard, or do you think it would be better if legislation were passed to basically let everyone work on their own volition?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have another interest, and what I do is I'm head of a not-for-profit for almost 40 years that provides drug and alcohol treatment. Upwards of about 2,500 people a year receive treatment.
Really?
And it's a combination of clinics, drug treatment programs, and halfway houses and other houses. And one of the key things that it does is it has a presence in the courtrooms throughout the capital region and in the jails. So what it does is the jails, people involved in criminal offenses often suffer from addiction, which drives their criminal behavior. And so, for example, if somebody needs money for drugs, they'll burglarize a house, or they'll steal from people in person, or they'll engage in welfare fraud, or they'll be impaired and they'll cause harm to somebody. They'll get into an assault. So what the program does is it's in the courtroom, and with the assistance of the judges kind of identify who might be there for an alcohol or drug addiction at their core, and then refers them to this program. And then the program does an evaluation and reports to the judge that, hey, this person has an addiction, and let's get after the addiction. And that combination with the criminal justice system often brings people out of their addiction, because now the judge says, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go into a detox, and then you're going to go to a rehab, and then you're going to go outpatient, and you're going to do that whether you want to or not, because if you don't, you're going to jail. And that becomes a real impetus, encouragement, hammer to get people to get themselves straight. So what does that do? That solves that person's drug problem. It probably improves their home life. It prevents them from causing other crimes if it goes on to a success path. And it's so that would never have happened except for the interfacing with the criminal justice system. That starts the process of forcing people to confront their problems, their substance abuse problems. It forces them to do that. And then the criminal justice system and the programs, and there's other programs like this, work together then to get the person clean and sober and productive and change their lives. And it's really, I think it's a good thing. I don't know that I understand the decriminalization all over the place. I understand that the jails have gone from overcrowded to undercrowded to starting to get ready to be closed and consolidated because of the decriminalization path of the law and the courts on drugs. I see that happening, and I see some goodness in that. I see the badness in that people who might be forced to think about where they're at and try to get clean and sober aren't doing it or won't do it because now there's nothing forcing them into treatment.
Right. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You're making sure that not everybody's getting thrown in jail, but at the same time, that ultimatum type scenario that happens when you hit that low point is kind of being taken away.
Exactly. And no one wins from that.
Yeah.
Just allows them to return to the negative behaviors, which affects so many other people than the person who's addicted.
Yeah. That's an interesting way that I have not heard the argument before. Most people that I've come across that talk about decriminalization of drugs in a negative manner don't think of it from the addict's perspective. They think of it as, oh, well, drugs are bad and they're wrong. But that's a very interesting perspective you've put on it, that the negative ultimatum scenario needs to be there for someone to kind of wake up and really get their life together. That's such interesting. It's been fun. I really enjoyed this interview. I've learned a lot. Before we go, do you have a favorite case of yours or a favorite fact about the Fourth Amendment or anything that you want to share with the listener, that something you just find extremely interesting?
Yeah, I find the people who find themselves in Fourth Amendment cases really interesting, and all the cases are special to me in some way. One of the more interesting ones was I represented a woman who was actually an athlete, a basketball player, who's also a very attractive woman who was at a bar one night, and she was playing pool, and there was a guy hitting on her, and she gave him a really hard no thank you, filled with some expletives, and he happened to be an off-duty cop who proceeded to contact his friends who were on duty and told them to come over to the bar to arrest her on an allegation that she harassed him. And they did that, and they got her into the station. They handcuffed her, they brought her into the station, and they allowed this off-duty to come up behind her and slam her head to the ground and choke her.
Wow.
And
that's horrible.
And we caught it on video. It was caught on video at the jail, part of it. So there's dark spots, and the police know where the dark spots on the video are. But we were able to get an expert out of Arizona who was able to enlarge the frame, and we were able to see it. He enlarged it by just about 3 inches. And so we were able to see the assault, and we brought a successful claim for her. But that was one of the more interesting cases that I ever had, which was using the police to get back at somebody who disses you on a possible date. I thought that was an odd way to use police.
I mean, that's terrible that happened, but that is definitely a new one. I don't think I've ever heard of something like that happening before. This is a very interesting topic. It's it covered more than I thought it did, like with excessive force. I didn't picture the interview going that way, but it's very good that it did, because I learned something, and the listener learned something, and people. The goal of this Summer of Rights mini-series is that people learn more about their constitutional rights and how it applies to everyday life. And I think that this is a great interview for accomplishing that goal. So thank you very much for coming in. If you're listening, this has been Calling Out Controversy. This is Kevin Luibrand of Luibrand Law here in Latham. And that's all the time we have for tonight. So thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Calling Out Controversy. Don't forget to hit us up at the WVCR website and write to us. Comment on this video on YouTube. Tell us what you think. Tell us your opinions. We'd love to answer questions for you guys. You just got to write in. Thank you again for staying tuned. And next week, it's Amendment 5, Eminent Domain. And we're going to try and